I would like to welcome you to our conversation tonight. I enjoy all our conversations, but this one, for a number of reasons, is something I've been looking forward to a long time. Grateful you all would join us for Father's Day, and you can tell by our names in case you just happen to flip here. I'm Sean McDowell. I teach at Biola University, and this is my father, Josh McDowell. Recently, I was just thinking about the life that he's lived and how unique and significant it is, and so many lessons that he's taught me in my life. And I thought, you know what, there's a lot of people, a number of untold stories that have not been shared. So I called this the Untold Stories of Josh McDowell, the life of a radical. I see we've got a bunch of people already joining us so far, which is exciting. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about your background, Dad, but I'm going to give a quick intro. And just to give everybody a sense of where we're going, the point here is to draw out certain experiences that you've had and just life principles and wisdom that have helped you be just so influential in your life. And so in some ways, you're really an unlikely person to have lived the life that you've lived. My grandfather, your father being an alcoholic, you've been open the past few years sharing about the sexual abuse that you experienced at home. Having your sister take her own life, having a stutter growing up. In some ways, you're the least likely person to have the influence that you've had. But with that said, you've written over 150 books, spoken over 1,200 universities, spoken to as many or more young people as anybody alive, TV show, radio show, on and on. And what I want to do is just dive into here and just talk about some experiences that you've had. So we're going to skip over some of your childhood. And you grew up, your father became a believer, my grandfather, maybe 6 months or a year before his death. But your mom had already passed away before you became a Christian. And you were at Talbot Theological Seminary, maybe your mid-20s, wanting to know, and you prayed to God to find out if your mom was a believer or not. What happened and how did you find out?
Well, in growing up, my father was an alcoholic, so probably if I got any nurturing, it was from my mother, your grandmother. And so I was quite closely attached to her, but not my father. And the first Christmas after she passed away, I was alone, stayed back. I didn't have anywhere to go at Christmas at Talbot Seminary, so I stayed and was studying. And I woke up on a Saturday morning with the idea in my mind, my mother going to be in heaven. And it so bothered me, I couldn't study. So right there, I prayed. I said, God, somehow, I had no idea. I never showed. Can you specifically show me whether my mother would be in heaven or not? I just need to know. Tried to study more, couldn't, so I got in my car, drove to Manhattan Beach. And I parked it, walked out on the pier, and there was a woman over on the right fishing. And so I said, hey, have you caught your breakfast yet? And she held up a big stringer, and I went over and started to talk. And ended up, she was my Aunt Emma. It was incredible. And she called me over because after I met her, and I didn't know at that moment she was my Aunt Emma, I was standing at the end of the pier, and I guess she thought I was going to jump and commit suicide. She said, young man, don't do it. Don't do what? She said, don't jump. I said, oh, lady, that's the furthest thing in my mind. So when I started talking, I found out she was my Aunt Emma, and found out that she was a Christian. It was in Manhattan Beach. That's where she lived. And she accepted Christ at Manhattan Beach First Baptist. So I said, hey, because she and my mother were brought up together, and I don't. And I said, do you know if my mother ever accepted Christ? She said, yes, we both did it together when we were 16 years old at a revival in Idaho. And I said, I couldn't believe it. Less than 2 hours before, I prayed what I thought was an impossible prayer, and God specifically answered it, yes, she'll be in heaven. And that probably showed me more the power of God through prayer than anything in my life.
Dad, one of the things when people ask me about you, I say there's nobody I know that I have seen the hand of God on more than you. And this is a glimpse of some of the supernatural things that we're going to jump into here. So before this, you were at Wheaton College, and you told me one time about an invitation that this Dr. Richard Halverson had. And it was really formative in your experience and worldview. Tell us about it.
Well, we're at Wheaton Chapel, and because it was Dr. Richard Halverson, Spiritual Emphasis Week, and it was the last day, Friday. So everybody had to go. And we were packed in there, and he got up and spoke from Isaiah
6.
6. And God said, "Whom will go for us? Whom can we send?" And he said, Isaiah responded, "Here am I, send me." So that was his invitation. He said, "I want to give you that invitation now as an audience." God said, "Whom will go for us? Whom can we send?" Are you willing to stand to your feet and come forward and say, "God, here am I, send me"? Well, going into ministry was the last thing in my life. My life was centered around law school. And hundreds went forward. Dick Burnell, my roommate and very dear friend, when he got up and walked forward, that was it. I got up, ran out of the building. I went out the side door. Everyone saw me. And I hit the alarm bars. And boy, it did a big smack. Went out, went back to my room, and tried to go to sleep. Pulled the covers up, and I could not go to sleep. Of course, it was midday. And so finally I got up, and I went walking. And I was walking down West Union Street, downtown Wheaton. I don't share this often because it's hard to know exactly what happened. But I was walking downtown, and finally I just said, I felt like I was left out. Why? Growing up the way I did, I had a stutter, an alcoholic father, a lousy home life, everything. And I didn't think I had any gifts or abilities. And one thing Dr. Halverson said, bring your gifts, your abilities, and place them on the altar. And I felt so left out. That's why I ran out. And finally, I just said, I stopped on West Union Street, right by the railroad tracks. I said, God, I've had it. If this is Christianity, I don't want anything to do with it. And then I prayed something. I didn't know you could pray, but it was a desperation prayer. I said, God, I don't think I have any gifts or talents. I have a stutter. I have poor grammar. I grew up in a country town where my parents never went beyond the second grade, and I had horrible grammar, everything. And so I said, God, I place it on the altar. Here's my stutter. I give it to you. Here's my poor grammar. I give it to you. Here's an alcoholic father. I give it to you. Here's my lousy home life. I give it to you. And I'll never forget, I said, if you can take my weaknesses and glorify yourself, I'll serve you the rest of my life. I truly believe I'm living a supernatural life. You said earlier, I'm probably the last person ought to be doing what I'm doing. I mean, come on, no one's lectured more universities than I have. Probably no one has ever dreamed of having as many intellectual debates in universities as I have. And I look at my background and I laugh. And I really believe I'm living beyond my limitations. And every time I open my mouth, most people don't catch my stutter. I pretty well overcome it because when I came to Christ, some people would call it arrogant. I became so confident that literally Christ could do anything through me. And I really believed him, which was kind of foolish for somebody with my background. Right? And I really believe he took my weaknesses and turned them into my greatest strengths. And I never dreamed I'd write a book. Not with my grammar, everything else. And so every day is exciting to me because I think I'm living a supernatural life.
Well, Dad, I see God's hand on your life, but I also see you work your tail off. And when you became a Christian, this is back in your lower 20s, in Kellogg College, you wanted to become a speaker, but you had nobody to speak to. Where would you go practice speaking? I don't know if I've ever heard you share this publicly.
Well, one thing that got to me was I would go to a number of speakers, I won't mention them, who were older than I was and very national speakers and all. And could I travel with you? Could I follow you? Could I get your notes? Every single one said no. And when I walked away from the last one, that everybody listening would know who it was, I said, God, if I ever become a national spokesperson, I'm going to do everything I can to help others to become speakers. And now, what was your question?
Oh, you described you would go practice at these gravel pits
Oh, yeah.
speaking.
I would go home in the farm, and I wanted to learn how to speak. And so I went out to the gravel pit. We had a big gravel pit. You couldn't see it till you got up onto it. Then it was a huge hole in the ground with one road going down to it in the back of our big farm. And so I would go down there, and I set up stones and some wood and everything like a podium. I was a brand new Christian, and I would try my best to convert the stones and all through the gravel pit.
So the stones would cry out. That is biblical.
And later, I used to laugh thinking, what if somebody had been wandering by and heard me? They would have thought I was crazy. But I always figured if I could convert a stone, I could convert anybody in the world through the power of the Holy Spirit. So I got and then what I did, I called in Grand Rapids, in Battle Creek, Detroit, Chicago, I called Skid Row missions. And I said, could I come up and speak? Well, they almost never had anyone asked to speak in a Skid Row mission. And I figured if I could speak for 30 minutes in a Skid Row mission, when they have to go to chapel, then they could eat. And if I could hold their attention for 30 minutes, I could hold the attention of anyone in the world. And so I cut my teeth in Skid Row missions. And it was incredible. And after about the third one, these guys they would lean forward in their seats and he'd read right out of the palm of your hand. So I said, man, I can do it.
That's awesome. That shows how hard you worked and how much you practice this, that time other people are not willing to put in. You also have perhaps the most amazing memory of anybody I know, but it's not just natural. You actually worked at this. To those viewing, we're going to move forward to debates and Marxist rallies and some pretty crazy revolutionary stuff. But this amazed me when you shared with me how you would develop your memory so later when you were in debates and speaking, you had like a photographic memory. What did you do to develop that when you first started out?
Well, I went to Mrs. Hampton, my English teacher in college, and a couple others at Kellogg Community College, and asked them that, and none of them could tell me. So I just figured out, okay, use it or lose it. So if I use it more, I ought to gain it. So for 2.5 years, I'd go down to these different hardware, don't ask me why, always a hardware store. And I'd stand in front of the window, and I would just stare, and I learned to relax my eyes. And I would look and stare and repeat over myself everything I saw, what the item was, what it cost, and its color. And then I'd walk away and try my best to recall 30 items. Then I'd go back, I just did that over and over and over again. After a while, I was able to walk away and recall 50 items, what the cost was, where it was located, its color, everything. And I just think I developed a photographic mind. I always tell people I have a photographic mind, but no film. But I developed what I would call a photographic mind. And the way I used that in school, I hardly ever shared this with anyone. Every Friday, I would never go out on a date or to a ball game or anything in college. I always went to the library, got there at 6 o'clock, and left at 10:30 when it closed. And I completely reviewed everything I'd studied or learned that week. And I'd write up summaries. I'd take my notes and summarize them, everything. Do I understand this? Do I understand this? By 10:30, I knew what I knew and what I didn't know about those subjects that I was taught. And then when I got ready for an exam, I created a grid. And most of my grids had a number of columns in it, about 6 columns, and I'd have 6 sections going down. And then it would have all these columns. And so across the top, I would put the subject, any possible question I could be asked or anything. And then I put 5 underneath that 5 supporting arguments for it. And then when I filled out the entire grid, I memorized it. And if you listen carefully, you almost can tell 90% of the questions you're going to be asked by a professor. So I would go in. Everybody else would grab and they start writing. I would put my notepad down from me, hold the pen in my left hand, and I had to have a blank. I'd stare at the blank wall, and believe it or not, it was incredible. This grid would appear on the wall. And I would sit there I learned to write without looking. And I would do the 6 questions with the 5 support each, all blindly on the paper. Then I sit down. I never wrote an essay exam. I never got an A on. Because I organized it, because I learned to memorize. Now, there's a downside to that. I probably didn't get as much out of my education as a lot of people did. Why? I short-circuited the process of learning, of interaction, everything. But I learned a lot. I mean, every dollar I spent was well worth it. But I probably could have learned more in college.
But as it moves towards you speaking and debating, that's why you could have so many things in your mind. You could see it and respond on the spot. That's why you're able to have over 200 debates or so. Let me shift.
But see, when I did a debate, I spent more time reading, studying my opponent than I did my position. When I went into a debate, I knew about everything that person had ever said. I don't know anyone else that did this. I would find out some of their former students and get their class notes. And I would study the class notes in philosophy and this and that and all that he would speak on. And when I went into a debate, I was prepared. I went in with a stack of 3x5 cards that big, probably 6, 7, 8 inches tall, and I divide them up, and I would intimidate my opponent. I would set them on the table all in front of me, and they'd look over at it, and I'd be going down here like this, and I would intimidate. I figured anything to win.
So let's talk about that. I was going to shift forward to that, but you did 200 debates with existentialists, with Marxists.
252 debates.
252 with atheists, humanists, with at least one Muslim, Ahmed Deedat. What was that preparation like for you going into those?
I probably did the same thing with debating that I did with speaking. Whenever I prepared a talk, it was a lot of work. I probably spent an hour and a half researching, studying for every minute I talked. I would spend up to 60, 70, 80 hours on a talk. He said, yeah, but you didn't need that. I did, because I would gain probably 4 times the information and knowledge that I needed to debate or to speak on a subject. But it gave me confidence. It gave me confidence and boldness that I knew the subject, and I pretty well knew no one could blindside me. I mean, I'd done my homework. And I would say to my opponent, this used to intimidate him, the more you could get your opponent to agree with you in a debate, the better it was. And so I'd make a statement, and I'd turn, I say, now, I wouldn't say Dr. Deedat, I'd say Deedat. I wouldn't honor him with a doctorate. I'd say, Deedat, isn't that true? Why? He knew, because already I said, well, you know, December the 19th, 1984, in your 2 o'clock class in the afternoon, you said this. I had it all documented.
Wow.
And after a while, I mean, it was so funny. I'd have my opponent say, well, I must have said it because I'm sure you've got it documented. And the moment they'd say that, the debate was over.
I want to draw this out so people realize, like we've said a couple of times, I really believe God's hand has been on your life, but you work harder than anybody else that I know. Let me shift to when you're back at Talbot now. You're planning on going into law and becoming the governor of Michigan. And one of the professors, I don't know who it was, you don't have to mention it at the time, kind of made a smart comment to you like, well, you know, ask McDowell, he'll know. You got up and you were going to leave Talbot Seminary and bail, but something happened at that moment that shifted you into focusing on students. What was that?
It was an 11 to 12:30 class, and the professor's an incredible guy. I mean, he's probably one of the best professors at Talbot. And I had dated a lot of girls. This was about 3 weeks in, and I had already dated a number of girls. And he made a comment. It was totally appropriate, but he made some smart aleck comment about me dating girls. So he said, "Isn't that right, McDowell?" That was what triggered in me. This is my time. I picked up my books, walked up to the front, slammed my books down on the table in front of the entire class. I said, "I don't need to take that. I'm through. I'm out of here." And I stormed out of the class. I walked out in front of Biola, Talbot Seminary, and I went to the left. And there was a middle school. And about 5 to 12, the bells rang. Students just streamed out of that school. I think they came out between the bricks and the mortar. And I haven't shared this for years. I don't know what happened. It was kind of like I was paralyzed. And these young people run all around because I was standing right in the center. And it was like God said to me, "Josh, I've called you to reach young people. Don't turn back." I don't really know what happened. But immediately I turned around, went back into the class, in front of everyone, apologized to the professor. And from that moment, I looked at my education as a cemetery, and it became a seminary from that moment on, and never looked back. I've been enticed with huge salaries, a lot of money. Bell and Howell offered me an incredible contract to travel and be a spokesperson for Bell and Howell. And it didn't even bother me to say no. It wasn't even a difficult, because I think once you've made the big decision, all the smaller decisions fall right into place. And so every time it was easy to me to walk away from enticements like that, because God through the Holy Spirit had led me to make I call it a cataclysmic decision that's life-changing.
So you've been with Crew 55 some years, and over time, a lot of people have said, "Josh, you're going to burn out. You're doing too much." How have you, after all these years, number one, you could have retired some time ago. How have you stayed motivated for so long, and how are you still motivated today to basically use every breath for the cause you believe in?
Part of it's my worldview, which leads to my convictions, and my convictions lead to principles. I basically run my life, even now, on principles that are backed up by convictions, backed up by my worldview, backed up by the scriptures. And one of my convictions is, in fact, I sent myself a text message today to remind me of this. I was sitting out front of your house. And I got it on my cell phone, wherever it is. It's probably still at your house. But I typed out, "Josh, never forget that I have never, in 58 years in ministry, 129 countries, I've never met anyone that Jesus didn't die for. Doesn't matter race, whatever. I've never met anyone of any creed, color, ethnic group, race, whatever, that Jesus didn't die for. Second, I have never met anyone, I mean some nasty people, that I didn't remind myself, God loves that person. Can I do any less?" And I think my view of humanity, that we're all created in the image of God with infinite value, dignity, and worth. And second, that Christ died for everyone, and God loves every single individual. And then I'm like a little kid with it. I think being in the ministry, being on Campus Crusade for Christ crew staff, is one of the greatest privileges in life. I was going to go to law school And I would. I was going to become a governor of the state of Michigan and a state senator. Oh, my gosh. That looks like such a lousy perspective now with what God has called me to do. Not that being a governor isn't great, but it's not great for me. It's great for somebody else. And so I would say my convictions about Christ, the scriptures, my convictions about the value of people, and my convictions about God loving every person I've ever met is where most of my enthusiasm comes from.
That's awesome. I love that. I've seen you do that and demonstrate that and live it out. And yet it might surprise people. You don't pray for opportunities to witness and share your faith with people. You pray something different, don't you? You have a different approach when it comes to sharing your faith.
Well, it all started when I used to ask people about if God's leading me into Christian work, whatever, and I want to go to law school. My heart is not in the ministry or anything until I met Bill Bright. And of course, you said 5 minutes of Bill Bright and you go out and change the world. And he was a founder of Cru, Campus Crusade. And everybody would say, well, just say, Lord. Everyone I talked to said, open the door and I'll go. Just ask God to open the doors and I'll go. So I started praying that way and I said, that's pretty ridiculous. I started to think, man, there's doors open all over the world. So then I thought, a real step of faith. And if I'm going to go into ministry, I better learn to take some big steps of faith. A bigger step of faith to pray is, God, I'm going. And if you don't want me to go, close the door. Wow. Now that takes some faith. And you know what? To this day, he's never closed the door.
Wow.
And even with people, I don't say, Lord, do you want me to talk to that person? God, if you don't want me to, show me. Do something, which is very seldom. Yeah.
Dad, we talked about the story going back to the gravel pits, how much you had wanted to be a speaker for years. You got on Cru staff and for a number of years was just serving in different capacities. And finally got invited to teach at this international Bible school. You prepped for 6 months on Romans. And then all of a sudden Bill Bright called you because I believe it was at Arrowhead.
Let me put it into context. Into context. Going through Talbot Seminary and all, I just had a burning desire to be a speaker. I graduated with seminary and went on staff of Campus Crusade for Christ. My first assignment was to become the director, go up to Canada, and be the second person to go up there to start the work. So I started at UBC. And since I wanted to be a speaker, we had 18 outreach meetings. I spoke at every one of them. I figured I was the boss. I chose who was going to speak. So I did 3 different 6-point part series for the 9 months of school at the University of British Columbia. And the crowd just kept getting bigger and bigger up to where instead of 200-300 out there you normally had in Cru, we had 2,300 to 2,500 coming out. And I really enjoyed it. And so then in Cru, one of the heaven on earth is to be invited to teach at the Institute of Biblical Studies. And so I was going to teach Romans. I spent hours, I researched, I thought, really good notes. And I was all set. And I get a call from Bill Bright. He said, I need you to get down here right away. He said, we've been into the big new Arrowhead Springs Hotel, which was the headquarters. And all the maintenance, everything started to fall apart. And food poisoning, salmonella or something like that, spread through the first international conference Cru had ever had with all their staff from all over the world. He said, get down here right now. I need you to operate Arrowhead Springs and clean it up. I said, Bill, I'm speaking at Cru. What? Somebody else could do that. You get down here right now and do this. I was crushed. But I did it. I got in my car, drove down. It was a lousy trip. Got down there. I was cleaning toilets. First time I met Billy Graham, Bill Bright, and Billy Graham was walking down the hallway in the second floor of the hotel. And I was walking up with a bucket of poo-poo in one hand and a plunger in another for just cleaning out these toilets. And as I walked by, I could hear Billy Graham go, "Wow." And Bill said, "Oh, that's Josh McDowell, our director of Canada." And I wanted to turn around, which I did. I put my plunger down, set the bucket down. I went like this with my hand, stuck it out to Billy Graham.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm sure he went and got sanitizer after that. Well, later, I was all set to go to the first crusade meeting, and Billy Graham was speaking. I was so excited. Well, suddenly we had a brand new, in the whole huge lobby, new red carpet. Went through the lobby into a big reception area, out into a big indoor patio. And they had new blacktop pavement outside. Somebody walked through it, walked in across and you saw the black tar all the way across the center. I'm coming down. Bill Bright grabs me. He said, "Josh, go to the front desk, get that can of stuff, and right now, clean this up. It's got to be gotten right now." I did it, not with joy in my heart. I went over, picked it up, got some rags and a scrubber, and I started cleaning. And the more I cleaned, the madder I got. Finally, some staff would come by, said very appropriate comments, but I was in the wrong mood. And somebody said something that just irritated. It was appropriate, but it's the mood I was in. And I stood up, and I said to the staff, "I don't need to take this." He's like, "What in the world just happened?" I walked over to the front desk of the beautiful Irish Springs Hotel, took the can, which is about that big, had a nozzle about the size twice the size of your thumb coming out the top, and I walked over and I said, "I've had it," and I slammed it down on the desk. Oh my gosh. It went everywhere. Oh my gosh, all this beautiful stuff was covered with tar remover. And the moment I slam it down, and it sounded like a crack of lightning almost, a thunder, and it was like God said to me, "If I can wash their feet, why can't you scrub their floors?"
Wow.
Sean, I don't know exactly what happened, but when I turned around from there, I went back. No one has ever scrubbed floors better, faster, and harder than I. No, I did.
I believe you.
And God took me from scrubbing floors to being a premier speaker all over the world. That's just so exciting. I'm so thankful for that. I know I'm not supposed to get excited, but I do.
Oh, you should definitely get excited. I am all for that. I remember you shared with me when I was a kid, and I'm not sure I really understood the significance of this. But you talked to me how one principle you live your life by is you would never speak to segregated crowds. Why not? And especially when you started in the 60s and 70s, I presume this was much more common. And I've read some other speakers who would speak to segregated crowds. Why wouldn't you? And just give me one example where you had a choice to make, maybe not speak because people didn't want to budge.
I developed a decision in my life not long out of Talbot, when I realized I've never met a person that Christ didn't die for. I've never met a person who God didn't love. And I would go speak where they couldn't hear me. And so I made a decision. I will never speak to a segregated audience. I will never sleep in a segregated place. And I'll never eat in a segregated restaurant. And it's cost me financially everything. I mean, I lost some friends over it, everything, but that doesn't bother me. And I was in South Africa. I was invited to, what's the capital of South Africa? Oh, come on.
Is it Johannesburg?
Anyway,
Cape Town or Johannesburg? Which one is it?
No, anyway, it's where their parliament is, and I was invited by their parliament to speak to them at a huge breakfast. And I found out, It was all sponsored by Crew and some other organizations. I found out that it was segregated. And I went to the Crew director and said, I'm sorry, I can't speak. It was a day before, 2 days before. And they said, why? I said, well, just with a clear conscience, I cannot speak to a segregated audience. Well, we got all the money out there. We've rented a facility, all the advertising. Everybody's coming. It's going to be huge. I said, I just can't do it. So he said, well, what if we got it segregated? I said, I'd love to do it. So the first ever segregated meeting in Pretoria, South Africa, I did it. Went in, it was a big breakfast, lines of tables of 8 people, 3 on each side and 1 at each end. You could feel the tension. And a number of parliament and others didn't come. And a number of minorities didn't come because they were afraid. And so while everybody was eating, I do this anyway. I hardly never sit down and eat at a banquet, maybe sometimes more now than before. But I went around from table to table, went to the back, to the side, the center, the front, everywhere. And I walked up to the table, introduced myself, chatted with them, asked maybe 1 or 2 people a question, everything else. Then I went to another table and always made sure I singled out a black African to chat with them, looking right in the eye, ask them a question, thank them for something, talk to others there. And when I went back up, the crusade director said, you might as well go home now. I thought he was upset at me. And I thought he was literally saying, we don't want you to speak. Just go back, leave the country. And I said, why? He said, Josh, you've already given your talk. Wow. He said, do you sense what's going on here? The place has changed. And I cannot tell you how relieved I was that he wasn't telling me to get out of the country. He was saying, you don't have to give your talk. You've already given the message. And that played a significant role in my life because it deepened my convictions about racial issues.
That's awesome. I remember when we were in Russia one time, we were doing a pastor's conference, and they put Stephanie and I and you and Mom in a nicer place than all the pastors. And you said, I will not stay anywhere different. I want to stay with all the pastors. And they ended up bringing you over, and that place was even nicer.
And they got upset with me. But we moved over to kind of lousy quarters.
Well, I've seen you live that out. Let's talk about a part of your life that, to me, is one of the most interesting. By the way, Ken Wolgamuth, a friend of mine, said the capital is Johannesburg of South America. Is when you were first on Crew, very young, you were sent down to Latin America, kind of exiled, so to speak. Why were you sent down there? And this is in the year 67 and 68. Vietnam War is going on. It's the time that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Some of the greatest unrest in the history of our country is taking place. You're sent down to Latin America where these Marxist and communist revolution. Why were you sent down? And how did you start ministry down there, which prepped you for our audience to come back and start speaking on the free speech platforms at Berkeley in the 60s and 70s?
One reason I joined Crew is that Dr. Bill Bright, the church was central in his life and ministry. One of the fastest ways to ever get kicked off Crusade staff was being caught criticizing the church or a pastor. I've seen Bill Bright call people right in front of a whole audience and call them down, staff. And it's one of the reasons I went on, because I love the church. I believe the church is God's central instrument on the face of the earth. And we're to minister to it, in it, through it, etc. And the university was changing, everything was changing, anti-this, that. And the majority of the leaders of Crew wanted to make Campus Crusade a church. They wanted, because Bill always forbids staff serving communion or baptism. Because they said that, Bill said, look, that's the way to get the students into the church and connected with the church. You need to be baptized. Let me take you to this church, which is beautiful. I admire Bill for that. And so where was I in that? Oh,
This is where you were sent down to Latin America because you differed.
And so I was just a fresh, wet behind the ears kid out of seminary. And I took on the big leaders at Campus Crusade. Some of the most powerful men I've ever met in this life. Wow. Brilliant. Two of them were the best speakers I've ever heard to this day.
Wow.
And I took them on and stood up to them. And they were going to take a vote to vote Bill Bright out of Campus Crusade for Christ and then turn it into a church. This is part of the dirty laundry people don't know. And so I stood up in the theater and called them down on it and gave them why. I walked out. When I got to the front, here come four of the top leaders. They yelled out my name. We stopped right in front of the hotel. They said, look, we're the leaders. You're not. And they said, we're sending you to Argentina. And they literally said, we're going to get you out of our hair. You either go to Argentina or go pack your bags right now and never come back.
Wow.
Woo! Well, one, I had the conviction I was called by God to Campus Crusade for Christ. And I read in Revelation, I got to look this passage up, it said, follow those I placed over you, and I will hold them accountable. Well, this was not so much a moral sexual situation like that or anything. So I said, God, I'll go. And I went with joy in my heart, not resentment or anything else, went to Argentina. And as soon as I got there, I started to speak. And the Lord really blessed it. Ended up, I was doing these big theaters with thousands of students out in Buenos Aires and Cordoba and everywhere, Mar del Plata, La Plata, everywhere. And pretty soon I get a call from Bill Bright. He said, I want you to pack your bags, and by tomorrow night, I want you to be back in San Bernardino, California. He wouldn't tell me why. Well, I thought maybe he was going to fire me. Because the crusade leaders have said, you're not to be a speaker. They said, you will never be a speaker in Campus Crusade for Christ. So I went down there and became a speaker. So Bill called me back. We went down to this park, sitting around a picnic table. And it was a big day of all the staff picnic from headquarters down there. And he went off all alone with me. And he said, Josh, I want you to travel and become our national spokesperson. I want you to take on the Marxists and everyone from the free speech platform. I about dropped over because every speaker we'd had in crew had burned Bill.
Wow.
Every speaker had burned campus. They started thinking more highly of themselves than they ought to, and they knew better than Bill and everything else. And ended up, Bill fired them all, called me back, and I became the speaker. And it was interesting. He said two things to me. One, he said, kiss it, Josh. Kiss it? He said, yeah, K-I-S-S. I said, what do you mean? He says, keep it simple, stupid.
Huh.
And Bill said, look, you have the intellectual capacity to take on anyone in the university. You can argue in the scriptures Christ like no one I've ever heard. But he said, that's not the ministry God has given you. He's given you a ministry to lead people to Christ, not to win arguments. And that's stuck in my mind to this day. Keep it simple, stupid. K-I-S-S, kiss. Second, he said, Josh, I trust you. I will back you up. And this is what made Bill Bright a great leader. And it's also a way to get me to do something for you. Well, no, you try to back me in the corner, and I come out fighting. This is the best way for someone to get what they want out of me. Some people learn that. Is Bill spoke at a big student staff meeting about something. I was the next speaker. And I totally disagreed with him. We'd had many conversations about it. So I knew I had to say what I believed. And Bill, my boss, had just been there saying the opposite. And so I was very careful, respectful, everything. And when I finished, I walked down the steps, were right in front of the podium. I walked down, there was Bill at the front table. His back was to me, but he turned the chair around. Everyone just saw nothing. They all stared. Bill went like this. Everybody saw him. And I went over. This is leadership. He said, Josh, you know I disagree with you. But he said, I trust you. All I ask you to do, just pray about it. And then do what you believe God says you to do.
Wow.
Oh. I quit saying what I was saying for a while.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, when you were down
actually, it's nothing super Z. He was saying the church is at the point of revival. And I was saying, Bill, church isn't even near a cough, let alone a revival. and I would give him good evidence. On his dying day, well, several days before he died, he asked me to fly to Florida. I flew. He was in the hospital, very weak and everything. And Bonnet was there and some others. He asked everyone to leave, had him close the door. He went like this because he couldn't talk, and I went over and he said, Josh, you were right, and I apologize.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
That's a man of God.
Wow.
And I learned from that. Whenever I am wrong, I want to be the first to apologize. But if I am right, I will charge on a white horse.
Well, the good part is now I know how to get what I want from you, so I'm taking notes.
But I'm wiser now than I was then.
Of course you are. Hey, let me move back to when you were down in Latin America. You learned Marxist thinking. You started speaking down there. And one of the things that happened is because people were coming to Christ, some of the radicals and revolutionaries were not so happy with this. Your life was threatened a few times, you described, and on the way out, as you were heading back to the States, you enrolled in this.
Let me put this in context. Let me put this in context. When I was assigned to go to Argentina, I knew I was going to become a speaker. And I knew I'd be confronted with Maoism and Marxism because it was spreading like wildfire. And so I went to a communist indoctrination center, which the front was a language school, the best in all Latin America. But every day, 3, 4, 5 hours, you got indoctrinated with Marxism. One was a man by the name of Ivan Illich. Anyone that's my age will know that name. A brilliant, powerful counter-espionage agent with the Allies and the Germans. And I went there because I knew I needed to be informed. That in a debate, the best preparation was to go to the horse's mouth, this training center, and be indoctrinated by Marxists. Sean, it was one of the best decisions I ever made about any education. But what happened was I was there, and they'd have the big group, like there were 60 people together, and they'd have lectures. And then they'd break up into small groups. And these small groups, none of the professors or their coordinators wanted to have me in it because I was combative. And I started seeing 2 or 3 of them come to Christ, of their top leaders. And so they kicked me out and said, if you ever come back, we'll have you killed. Well, I got in my car and was leaving. They had already arranged for motorcycle policemen to be in the woods on top of the snow coming up like that. And they were standing there and had a 15-year-old girl. As I drove by, probably doing 45 miles an hour, all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, they threw the girl in front of my car. And I ran over her. Her head went up over the wheel. Oh. I don't know how she lived. Her head literally tore out that hard steel and the metal around the tire and everything, just tore it right out with her head. And so immediately the police was there. arrested me, and the police knew what was going on, and handcuffed me to the back of his motorcycle. Well, I'm claustrophobic, and the last thing you don't do is tie my hands behind my back or constrain me. I will get nauseated. I would start shaking and just fight. And so he handcuffed my hands behind, locked two, another set locked onto my handcuffs onto the seat of the motorcycle, and was driving away. So I thought, well, what do you do in a desperate situation? Talk about Jesus. So I started talking about Jesus, asked him if he knew Christ personally and everything. Did you have a believing mother? And I really laid it on. And we were out about 40 minutes on the cycle. And out of nowhere, he pulls way off the side of the road, gets out, takes my handcuffs off. John, I truly believed he was going to shoot me.
Wow.
Took my handcuffs off, and he said, "Are you an evangelical?" I thought, if I say yes, he'll probably really shoot me. I said yes. Then he told me a story. His parents were atheists, everything. In the first 2 years of college, he dated this evangelical girl who had a profound impact in his life. And he shared, and he said, "I've never been able to forget her." And then he apologized for what he did. He knew what had happened. So he took me into the judge, explained it, put his whole life. He said, "I really can't say anything. Because if I do, in Mexico, if you're a witness to someone, you're put in jail with that person until the trial's over." At that time in Mexico. And he said, "I live 40 miles away, and I got a wife and 3 children, everything." And he went there, and then the last moment he turned around and explained to the judge everything that had happened. And so I left there, and I never forget, the judge said, "Young man, do you have a car?" I said, "Yes, I got a Volkswagen bus." He said, "You go to it. You head straight to the border. Only stop for gas, and when you stop for gas, get food and nothing else. Get out of this country immediately, because they'll come after you." And so I couldn't go back for years to Mexico. But I got out and immediately flew to Argentina. And so that's how many...
Well, you were in prison for a couple weeks before he came back, right?
Yeah.
So you described that was pretty harrowing, and hearing some people just being tortured and really clinging to Paul's epistles at this time.
You ever seen a movie of Mexican jails? It's true. I was in a cell that I could look out over the Zocalo, the center part of the prison. And man, these cops would bring in these guys that were repeated offenders and just beat them to a pulp. They would take their clubs, and then they'd take whips and just whip them and then throw them out of the prison. And I was warned by the police, don't say anything. Wow. And so I thought, well, talk about Jesus. So I said, "Could I get some chalk?" They said, "What do you want chalk for?" I said, I'm a cartoonist. I like to draw. So they brought me 2 or 3 different pieces of chalk. And so when the guards would come, I would draw prophetic outlines of history. And when I had Jesus coming back, I said, I lied a little bit. I said, the first person they were coming back to judge are crooked policemen. And I had them so scared. And they went and talked to the judge, everything else, and they let me out of jail with a $50 fine.
Oh, my goodness. All right.
And then when they took me to get my Volkswagen bus, they said, "Well, we need $200. I said, "Why?" "Well, your tires they took the tires off and then sold them back to me at $50 a tire."
Oh, my goodness.
And so I couldn't go anywhere without tires, and I had about $300 back. So I paid $50 a tire. They put them back on, and I headed for the border.
Well, one of the things you said that really gave you confidence in your faith was how quickly you could speak Spanish, and people just mentioned this to you on a number of occasions. What happened that you started 2 weeks of practice, you were preaching in Spanish almost fluently?
Well, within 2 months, about I was lecturing in Spanish, scared and all get out. I mean, it was very poor, broken Spanish. And the first time this happened, I was in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And the center of the Marxist student radicals was the cafeteria. And they had a deck there that mainly only Marxists was ever permitted to speak on it every day over lunch. And they would crowd outside everything. Well, Benjamin Carrillo, the crew director, used to be a Marxist, so he knew everyone. So he went and got me scheduled to speak there. And everyone came out in the university because they thought this is going to be a riot. And as I was speaking, they start to challenge me. And I try my best to answer. It went on for about 3 hours. When I walked away, Benjamin Carrillo walked me back to the Boulevard Church there, where his office was. He said, "Boy, that was amazing." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You don't know what you did?" I said, "Well, yeah, I just spoke to several thousand students for 3 hours." He said, "Well, every time somebody challenged you about Christ, the scripture, whatever, you went into a perfect dialogue, or perfect, not dialogue, dialect. And as soon as you answered it, you went back to your broken Spanish." I thought, nah. So then I fly to Chile. And I'm at the University of Chile, and Jim Thurston, just a little tiny guy, but oh, what a tiger. And he had arranged for me to speak outdoors, and they promoted me as a CIA agent. Well, we met Christian in Action, but everybody else meant Central Intelligence. And so, I mean, thousands came out. And afterwards, he came up to me and said, Jim said, "Boy, I've never seen that before." I said, "What?" He said, "I didn't know you spoke a perfect dialect." I said, "Well, I do." He said, "Every time somebody challenged you, you went." I said, So then I flew to Brazil, and I was in Brasilia. And this is when Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, under Nixon, was traveling around Latin America, setting up for the first time for an American president, I believe, to travel through Latin America. And, well, of course, he brought huge crowds out. And so I was in Brasilia, the center of student unrest and the capital of Brazil, and they cordoned off with police and soldiers the entire university. And I was stuck inside. And, of course, it was Portuguese. And I thought, what am I going to do here? I want to share Christ. So I was walking around, and I saw this big flatbed truck. The cab wasn't there. It was just the flatbed. And I said, "Can you get a sound system or anything?" They said, "Sure." I said, "Is it okay if I get up and speak from there?" And they said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So all the Christians got things advertised around. And as far as your eye could see, it was a crowd. They had nothing else to do. They were cordoned off in the university. And so I spoke Spanish very slowly because so many people down there would understand Spanish quite a bit to go across. And when it was over, I can't remember. I can see his face. The director came to me and he said, "Why didn't you tell me you spoke Portuguese?" I said, "I don't." He said, "What do you mean you don't?" He said, "You gave almost your entire talk in Portuguese."
Wow.
Well, needless to say, those three experiences really developed a courage and a boldness in my life to go anywhere, any group, any time, if I can talk about Christ, without fear. And those three experiences really built some courage and boldness into my life. And I don't know if I was speaking Portuguese or they were hearing Portuguese, because mainly I know Spanish and English, Greek and Hebrew.
Then there's another story you shared with me that gave you tremendous boldness in your faith. And I believe this dealt with a Dodge Dart, if I got the car correct, and was in Balboa during evangelistic outreach.
Yeah. In the summertime, Balboa, this is in Southern California, as I was seminary, they had what was called Bow Week. And before Daytona Beach or anything, students from all over the country would come to Bow Week during Easter. And it was over 3 different weeks. Thousands of students. You would drive down the main street. Students were everywhere, down every street, hanging on balconies, the windows open, everything. And we had a nightclub that had been closed, so we rented it. And we turned it in to a meeting place. And they had a little stage like up front, at least we made it look like a stage. And we would go out and hand out flyers and say, hey, Josh is speaking, come down. And we would pack it out 2-3 times a night. Now, pack it out meant probably 220, probably that's speaking evangelistically, about 200, 220 people could pack into us, about 600 a night. And so after a while, it was having quite an impact because we would do it at over 1, 2, 3 o'clock, and then 7, 8, 9 o'clock. And so some of the radicals saw we were having an impact. So they got in one of their cars, and they would stop right out in front. I mean, it was, 20 feet, 25 feet. And they'd rev the car up, and then they'd pop the clutch and just lay rubber for about 20, 30 seconds. Well, everybody inside would run outside right when I was speaking. What's going on and everything? So they realized it was working. So I didn't know what to do. So I went and stood in the door. I learned a concept called the authority of the believer. And I have a tape on it. People can go to my website, josh.org/authority of the believer. And it's how I learned a bonus to deal with Satan and satanic influence and everything. And so I stand in the doorway, and they came back and rubbed it up. And I prayed in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and his shed blood on the cross. I command you, Satan, to get out of here and do something with that car, Lord Jesus. They popped the clutch and blew their transmission literally all over the side. And everyone started applauding, came back in, and they never did it again. And when I learned that, I thought, wow.
That's awesome.
God is powerful. God is powerful. And it's one of those stories that still sticks in my mind. But now I've seen the authority of the believer exercised so much, it's incredible.
So you left Latin America, came over to the States, and started speaking on the free speech platform. And you would go to some of these Marxist rallies in the States and turn them towards, at the end of it, you would be actually sharing your faith. What were these rallies like, and how did you do this?
Well, you don't work smarter, you work harder. I do both. I try to work hard and work smart. The Marxists at that time were very strong, more Maoist than Marxists. And they controlled the free speech in so many major universities. These were areas designated by the university. Anyone could say anything they want. And they would control it. And once the reputation got around the various universities of what I was doing, they would never let me speak. So what we did, first time was at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois, in the south part. They had about, 1,800, 2,000, which was probably a fifth of the university out. And so we had Christians, about 30. And they went around to all different parts, Campus Crusade students, of the thing. And when they started to speak, after about 15 minutes, they would start chanting, "We want Josh! We want Josh!" And people are like sheep. They follow the shepherd. And if one sheep goes over the cliff, literally many other sheep will just follow them. And so everybody else, you start shouting, everybody else gets into it. So half the crowd was shouting, "We want Josh!" Nobody there even knew who I was, except these crusade students. I'm standing off to the right there, and I'll never forget, I was leaning against a tree. And finally, they did it so much the guy couldn't speak anymore, and he'd already been speaking a long time. He said, "Is this guy here, Josh, whoever he is?" And everyone said, "He's over there." They said, "Where?" And I raised my hand. He said, "Come on up here." And he handed me the microphone. And we did that university after university after university. Minister smarter, not harder. And so we learned how to get the free speech platform when we couldn't sign up for it.
And part of your methodology was you had to speak with boldness and confidence and shout, or people would just shout you off the stage and you'd scream, Cambodia, Vietnam. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, then you'd say, I'm revolutionary, I'm against these. What's the solution? Well, it's not economics, not education. Like, walk us through how you would turn. Walk us through how you would turn this rally where people showed up to hear Marxism to you sharing Christ at the end.
It's hard to understand today because there's no situation like it hasn't been for 15 years, what the free speech movement was like. And when you stepped up and took over a microphone, you couldn't pause. Especially if you're someone like me, that initially they didn't like you. You're a Christian. And they were Maoists, so many of them, or that persuasion. And if you even paused, man, it was a signal charge. And so you had to now I'd walk up there and I'd look the audience like this, I'd stare them down. And everybody, they'd start talking. What's good? And they'd look around like, who's weird here? And then I'd raise my fist. Vietnam, Cambodia, killing, murder. I'm sick and tired of it. And the crowd goes, yay! And then I said, I want to be a revolutionary. I want to follow a revolution. Yay! What's a revolutionary? A revolutionary is someone who understands the problem is not education, the problem is not environment, the problem is not economics, the problem is not technology. The problem is the very heart of the human being. And if you don't have something to change the heart, let alone change the environment, it'll never work. And I would say, well, who in the world is that guy? And everybody's kind of, well, come on, man, who is it? I said, there's a man, and I'd lead up, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, he's talking about Jesus. And you'd see a crowd transformed. And the reason it almost always happened, no one had ever thought that the problem is with the individual. It's with the individual. And if you can't change the individual, it doesn't matter what you do with the environment. You got a rotten egg. And so they were kind of surprised by the analysis of the problem. Then I learned something. A man with an argument is always at the mercy of a man with an experience. And so in every debate, every free speech, I always brought it to the point where I'd share my testimony. How I set out to write evidence against Christianity, refute it, to make a joke of it, and how I was confronted by some Christians. I laughed at them, so I set out to refute them, and how I became convinced the Bible is true, Christ is the Son of God, and against everything in my life intellectually, I became convinced intellectually that Christ on the third day was raised from the dead, became a Christian, and shared what happened. And this is why I say a Christian should never lose a debate, because a Christian should have the argument and the experience. Argument, every debate I think I've ever had, when it came to the 12, 13, 14-minute closure, I always gave my testimony. Because a man, my opponent with an argument, is at the mercy of a man with an experience.
Then I just have one or two more questions for you. Those listening, enjoying this, a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, give us some thumbs up. Help spread the word through the YouTube metrics if you're enjoying this. Second, we're going to have another conversation a few weeks down the road, Dad, and I want to ask you about the people that shaped your life. You have had some remarkable people in your life that have taught you lessons that, to me, are just really, really remarkable. But one other question I have for you is...
son, almost every lesson we've ever learned, we learn from someone. Almost every lesson in life. Go ahead.
Thanks. I just learned that from you, by the way. My question is, you have had your life threatened a number of times. Dynamite under stages, people trying to throw cylinder bricks down on you. I didn't know this, but when I was growing up, I guess the FBI caught somebody coming to kill you or our family a couple weeks or a couple blocks away from our home. Maybe just share one or two of these. And I know you don't share this publicly normally. I'm asking you to share things because I want to give people kind of a glimpse of just the life that you've lived. Give me an example of one or two. And how did you live through this when your life was, for a season, kind of consistently being really threatened, not people just writing mean tweets, but really threatening your life?
Probably a lot of it would go to a person's worldview, how they perceive reality, what is true. And for me, if I die is gain. If I die is gain. I was in a very tough situation right after 9/11 to go to Cairo and to speak to radical university students. And even the State Department said, don't go. Because the State Department heard a lot of chatter that they would kill me. And everybody was calling me, everything, even you kids, Dad, you can't go. And I'll never forget, Kelly called Mom. Mom didn't want me to go. But I think I married one of the greatest women that God ever created his whole life. She said, Kelly said, Mom, Dad can't go. She said, honey, the safest place for your father is right in the center of God's will. And right now it looks like it's in Cairo, Egypt. Wow. I'll tell you this. Few women have ever exercised faith like that. Because Dottie was crying and everything when I left, because it was dangerous. But it ended up to be one of the best trips I ever took in my life. Ended up in jail, but even that added to the excitement. But I would say the biggest thing that helps me is knowing where I'm going. Second, convictions. A belief is knowing what you believe. A conviction is knowing what you believe, why you believe it, and how to live it out in your life. Until you've lived it out, a truth is not a conviction. It's a belief. And you can know all you want about why it's true. And what was the question again, son? You got me off at so many things. My mind is going wild.
Well, it was about your life had been threatened. You describe in the book sometimes people put dynamite under the place you were speaking.
I was at, which university was it? Was it University of Texas? Anyway, it was a fairly good-sized hall, but actually small. It held about 1,800 people, and it was kind of long. And I was on the stage, and I was speaking, and in come police down one side, firemen down the other side. I thought, what in the world? Are they trying to put out the fires of hell or what? And they came up to me, called me. I went over and leaned over, and they said, we must evacuate immediately. There's a bomb threat to go off in the room. So I said, okay. So I said, men and women, I want you to be absolutely quiet. I said, there's a bomb threat. Any minute, you could be blown to hell. Well, I said that, and I said, I'd like to see you blown to heaven. And I said, right now, if you don't know Christ as Savior and Lord, and the police were going like this, I said, you know what to do. This is a prayer that I prayed, and I prayed it. I said, now, get out of here. And man, they ran to the back. And one of the policemen was a believer. He came outside and he said, that's one of the most courageous things I ever saw done. He said, I'm so glad you did it, even though we were waving you down. But I told him, you want to be blown to hell or blown to heaven?
Oh, my goodness. I have never heard that story.
And then another way to download it, to diffuse it, is certainly you have to be careful how you do it, is to confront. I was at University of California, Davis, about 3,000 students out. Huge semicircle in front. There were a couple big trees on each side. And there'd been some threats and everything, what was going to happen. And a guy in the back had a huge red apple and threw it at me. And it came like a missile like that. Well, the whole crowd saw it. The crowd was going, just like that. You're standing up there, still looking up at an apple. And I paged and I went on speaking. Just before I reached up and grabbed it, went like this. Thank you. Went on speaking. No one interrupted the crowd the rest of the time. That was the best apple I ever took a bite out of.
That is awesome.
And I wasn't disobedient to God. I was obedient with that bite.
That's awesome. Dad, I have so many more questions for you. And there's a ton of comments here. People seeing you at Petra concerts, seeing you in the university, reading More Than a Carpenter, around the world, people inviting you to come back to South Africa. So a lot of people
Invite me. I'll come back.
A lot of people are really, really grateful for your ministry. We're going to have you back. And we're going to talk about next time, this will be a few weeks away, the people that have influenced your life. Some of the people you've told me about that have taught you life lessons are really, really unbelievable. So we'll do a part 2 to this. But those of you who have enjoyed this, a couple things, make sure you give us a little thumbs up. Second, would you consider sharing this with somebody? The whole reason we want to do this is just take stories from my dad, a pretty radical life, and encourage and inspire and just motivate people, especially Christians, to be bold in their faith. So if that's Facebook, cut a little piece, put it on Twitter, spread the word to the world would be helpful. Second, make sure you hit the little subscribe button. We have some other interviews coming up with my dad, but also very shortly we'll have William Lane Craig on, one of the leading apologists in the world today.
Woo!
He has a
leading apologist.
I think he probably is. We have him coming on to do an interview. He has a book coming out on the atonement, and he will be coming on the day that it releases. This channel here is in partnership. It's my YouTube channel, but it's in partnership with Biola University, in particular the apologetics program. So if you've ever thought about wanting to study apologetics, come study with me, J.P. Moreland, William Lane Craig. There's information below. We would love to help equip you and train you in your church or in your ministry. If you're not ready to get a master's, that's too much of a commitment. We actually have a certificate program, and it's a way we'll just kind of walk you through how to learn apologetics systematically, and there's a significant discount below for joining us. Well, thanks for coming on, Dad. You know this. You're my hero. So proud of you. So grateful for you. Love you, and this is really a treat to do this together on Father's Day. So thanks so much. Everybody
Take care.
Have a great night. Love you, Dad.